I think it would be fair to assume that most of our musical preferences are at least somewhat influenced by pop culture in the context where we grew up. For someone who was born in the mid-'80s, grew up in the 90s, there's a huge part of my sort of musical DNA that comes from video games. And it's probably no surprise then that I would grow up hearing the Super Mario Brothers theme song and then start to appreciate jazz fusion because that's where that came from. And it seems probable that my appreciation for Japanese role-playing games in the early and mid 1990s would kind of plant the seed for me to eventually be really into progressive rock. What we're going to talk about today is a soundtrack from my very favorite video game of all time, Chrono Trigger. But this is not the official soundtrack. Let's talk about that. My name's Adam, and this is Medium Quality. Okay, we're back for another installment of Why Do I Own This? A series of videos where I take a good, hard look at my vinyl record collection and give an account as to why I own all these plastic discs with the music on them. And if you'd like to engage with me in this theater of the absurd, I put a link in the description section below to my Discogs account where you can find an up-to-date list of all the vinyl records that I own. And if you're so inclined, you can take a look at that index, drop into the comments section below, and let me know which of my albums I need to give an account for. And I think we'll have some fun along the way. Now, speaking of things that are fun, here it is. This is the Symphony of Zeal, a double LP unofficial soundtrack for my favorite video game of all time, which is the 1995 Super Nintendo RPG Chrono Trigger. It is by no means a controversial choice for greatest video game of all time. It's no secret that this game is beloved by people all around the world. And yet, Square Enix, for whatever reason, has not reissued or released the official soundtrack for this game in any format, really, that is easily accessible to most people in the world. We want to buy it. We want to own it. We want to listen to it in the best way possible. And that's where something like this comes in. Before we talk about what this is, I think it's helpful to take a quick step back and talk about how video game music exists in its original format and how it could get to a format like this. One thing I want to clarify when I talk about video game music is it's not all the kind of crunchy 8-bit beep boop sounds that you think of when you think of video game music. That's one of the reasons why I tend to like video game music from the 16-bit era the best. That's your Sega Genesis and your Super Nintendo. They all had dedicated sound hardware inside of them, whether that be simple FM synthesis or even some sampling technology like the Super Nintendo had. And I'm not sure that people realize how much talent and skill it takes to do so much with so little, to operate inside of the limitations of the hardware that was available at the time, to do interesting things melodically that even compel a person to feel something while playing a video game. And in rare cases, you have extraordinary talent like the composers at Squaresoft in the early 90s, like Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu, who created the music for Chrono Trigger. By the time that the technology advances far enough that CD quality audio becomes available in video game formats, you might as well just bring in a live band or an orchestra and record music that way. And the type of creativity that was inspired by the limitations of sound hardware in the late 80s and early 90s kind of disappears. You get a totally different thing. And I think that's kind of what makes video game music of this era so unique, so special, so evocative of a certain time and place. There are some incredible record labels out there that have dedicated themselves to faithfully capturing the original sound hardware in high fidelity and releasing that on vinyl. Data Discs, for instance, does some incredible work on Sega consoles, and their stuff is fantastic. Ship to Shore releases a lot of really good music as well. But that's not what this is. There are thriving communities on the internet of people who remix, reorchestrate, reimagine video game music. What Malcolm Robinson has done is rearranged and reorchestrated the music from Chrono Trigger using his own instruments, samples, I'm assuming, but samples that sound really good and really quite faithful to the original source material, just in higher fidelity than the relatively simple sampling technology that was available on the Super Nintendo in the early and mid 90s. Now, I heard this music a long time ago and thought that it was really fantastic. He did an excellent job, and this is one of the best Chrono Trigger tribute soundtracks that is out there. And when I realized that it was getting released to vinyl somewhat recently, I thought, this is it. I have to get this. I love Chrono Trigger. It seems like Square Enix has no interest in releasing an official soundtrack, and I'm going to support the amazing work that was done by this individual, paying tribute to a game that obviously we all love. And the package here is fantastic. You have brand new artwork from an artist named Kathy Kwan in kind of a like Japanese folk art style. So this is the Kingdom of Zeal from the game. And on the back, this is the iconic courtroom scene from Chrono Trigger, redone in that style. You know the courtroom scene. And inside we have Chrono himself locked in combat with Magus, one of the main enemies in the game. Manawave Records released a bunch of different colored variants of this. So by the time I even realized that this was a thing, many of those variants had sold out. I managed to get the Hero variant, which is gold and burgundy marbled vinyl. So if I have to answer the question of why do I own this faithful reorchestration of video game music from the mid-90s, the answer for me is very simple. This music evokes in me that childlike sense of adventure and wonder and mystery that the video game did all those years ago before the world got big and scary to me. I really don't know how this music would hit for someone who doesn't have a nostalgia for the game. That's certainly something I'd be curious to hear about, but for me, it totally hits. I love it so much, and I'm glad that this exists because as far as I can tell, there's no other way to get the Chrono Trigger music on vinyl anywhere. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Until next time, keep spinning that good stuff. What a time to be alive.